It was the greatest war crime in the shortest period of my lifetime. And to make a comparison with it, for those that find that interesting, at the time of 9/11, in a city of 8 million people, 2,960 were killed. In Gaza, in a community of 1 million, 1,300 were killed. So it's on a far bigger scale than 9/11. And the weapons that were used by the Israelis, phosphor bombs which burned people up, the bombing of hospitals, the bombing of mosques, the bombing of civilians, and now revelations coming out from Israeli soldiers who were fighting of the instructions they were given as to how they should conduct the fight against civilians. And now Roger Falk, I think, of the United Nations Human Rights Council, has said that in his opinion these war crimes should be examined, and it will be considered by the UN. I'm sure the Americans will try to veto it, but there's absolutely no question about it that this has been a turning point in the post-war relationship between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I think that the attitude of people in this country and even in America towards Israel has been transformed by what has happened. Up until now, you know, if you supported the Palestinians, they tried to say you were anti-Semitic or something of that kind. But now, I think people understand much more clearly what is going on. And of course, Netanyahu, the new Prime Minister of Israel, assuming he assembles his coalition, is opposed to a Palestinian state. He says he's changed his mind, but I wouldn't believe it. I think the Israeli policy is designed to complete the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, to get rid of all the Palestinians, at least leave them there in harmless little pockets surrounded by walls, and then Israel will be what it intends and wants to be, a superpower in the Middle East with nuclear weapons. It is now, I think, the 5th most powerful nuclear weapons state in the world. They don't even admit they have them. The Americans, who know all about it, don't really ever admit they have them. And now we know from quite a number of statements made in Israel they want to launch an attack upon Iran. So that is the situation that we face. And I think that what we have to try to do at this moment is a number of very clear things. First of all, to explain the history of this. This is a colonial intervention by Israel, just as the British occupied Palestine after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and then now the Americans see Israel as their permanent base in the Middle East. And it is going to end with an absolute disaster if, and I fear it could be, Israel, even without American permission, decides to bomb Iran. I think insofar as I can put it in clear language, this could be the beginning of the Third World War. And so that's the background against which we meet. And everybody knows, I don't have to say it, everybody knows that in effect the American policy is the one that determines it. Whether Israel is a colony of America or America is a colony of Israel doesn't much matter. Israeli policy controls American policy, and although Obama has made a few changes, withdrawing some combat troops from Iraq, and he even mentioned yesterday an exit strategy from Afghanistan, as far as Israel is concerned, not only Obama but also Hillary Clinton, utterly committed to the Israeli cause. And I have to say this because it's a part of the problem. The policy of the British government on this has been absolutely disgraceful. They've gone along with everything that the Americans have wanted, with Bush and now Obama. They follow along in the sense that they have not made the contribution they could have made. And if you take a simple issue like the attempt to starve Gaza into submission with the blockade, Britain has naval base in Cyprus, has warships in Cyprus, and could and should have used those warships to escort convoys with food and materials to Gaza, and they didn't do it. And they say the criticism of Hamas is they don't recognize Israel. But I mean, it's very difficult to recognize a country that hasn't even told you what its frontiers are. If you try to ask the Israelis what their frontiers are, oh, well, you know, the settlements are going on, East Jerusalem, we've taken over, and so on. And anyway, Hamas won the election in Palestine and is not accepted, and they say Hamas is a terrorist organization. Well, compared to the damage done by the Israeli army, which I think is terrorism on a massive scale, these arguments carry no weight whatever. And what's exciting to me and interesting is that things in this country have changed so rapidly as a result of the campaigns by the Stop the War and by the Palestine Solidarity campaign. I think the fact that students occupied universities and forced some of the universities to divest from their investments in Israel is an indication of popular opinion. And even in America, where if you're not 100% pro-Israel, you're hounded by the media, some American universities have been occupied by students. And so there is a background against which we can be, I don't say unduly optimistic, but it's a totally different situation than it was 10 years ago. But we've also got to think of it, I think, in the context of the present crisis, because this economic crisis, which is going on a global scale, is having absolutely devastating effects on people all over the world. The number of people dependent on food stamps in America, I read, is something like 37 million people in the richest country in the world. And the danger, and it is a danger, when you get an economic crisis, some man comes along and says, as Hitler did, "Give me power," said Hitler. "It's all due to the Jews and the communists and the trade unionists," said Hitler. "Give me power and I'll give you jobs." And he did. He took half the unemployed and put them in the arms factories, the other half he put in the German army, and we had a Second World War, and in 2 world wars over a period of a mere 35 years, 105 million people were killed in those 2 European wars. And with chemical, nuclear and biological weapons, you can be sure that any wars on those scales would really threaten to obliterate the human race. And I think the Stop the War movement is beginning to tap a very deep moral feeling in people that what is being done is wrong. And these weapons are so widely distributed now that we're contemplating something that no generation in human history has ever had to contemplate. The younger people, and there are a few here today, have got a power to destroy the human race, which never existed before. You kill 1 or 2 people with a bow and arrow or a rifle or a pistol or a bomb, but with chemical, nuclear and biological weapons you could obliterate the human race. On the other hand, it's the first generation in human history that has the know-how, the technology and the money to solve the problems of the human race. If the money spent on war was spent on building schools and hospitals and homes and recruiting teachers and nurses, not only would the world be a much better place, but it would be a much safer place, because poverty is the greatest cause of war. And you see even recently these little examples of violence in Britain, Fred Goodwin's house having the windows broken. When you start that, then you find that the whole thing escalates, and then that's when the strong man comes along and says, "Give me power and I'll deal with all this." And in that connection, there's another aspect relating back to what we are discussing, namely the use of the war which we have launched as a use of it as an excuse to attack the Muslim community. And this is a terrible thing to do, because my understanding, I'm in the presence of a bishop who will tell me if I'm wrong, but although there is great divergence between the teachings and practices of Islam and Judaism and Christianity, all the great religions of the world were founded by men who said you should treat other people as you want to be treated yourself. That is the golden rule. And on trade union banners it says an injury to one is an injury to all. And when I heard Bush say God told him to go into Iraq, as if God had an office in the White House, or when Osama bin Laden said, "If you don't accept my view of the Quran, you should be executed." And the worst of all, I think, are the Zionists who say that Moses went up Mount Sinai. Well, I was brought up on the Bible. And Moses went up Mount Sinai, and God allocated Palestine to the Jews as if God was an estate agent. And they use that argument. And all these are ways of dividing the human race at a time when I think everybody recognizes, quite candidly, we live or die together. So this great Stop the War movement has been formed and has been working so actively, has got within it very, very many important points. Guide to what we should do now, a perspective for the future. And perhaps most important of all, it is an organization that has brought Muslims and Christians and Jews together for peace. I think long after all this is over, assuming we get through it, there will be bonds of friendship between the communities here. Wherever you go, people are the same. That's the point. Regardless of your religion, your colour, or we're all human beings. And it's the basic thing. Morality has got to be the basis for our policy. Otherwise, we shall find there's no society for your great-grandchildren and my great-great-grandchildren. So thank you for coming.